This video is titled 4 Things Science Will Never Ever 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 Be Able to Explain. And so a lot of people say, oh, how dare you, Ben? How dare you hold science back and say that science isn't allowed to investigate and find explanations for these 4 things? We can logically prove that these are just outside the realm of science. Science has inherent boundaries. And one of those boundaries is the physical. Science studies the physical. It doesn't study the supernatural. Because the supernatural is non-physical. It's something you don't observe in any way. You don't perform experiments on. It exists beyond time, space, matter, and energy. So, if you want to extend science to the study of things beyond time, space, matter, and energy, okay, then science could answer questions about the supernatural one day. But for the most part, typically, that's not what we're talking about. We're not talking about science doing any investigation of that. We're talking about, physics. Time, space, matter, and energy. And so what are the 4 things? Well, thing 1. Free will. You've got an oxygen molecule with its -2 charge. You got a couple of hydrogen and a hydrogen with their +1 charge. And, they're moving about. They've got a momentum in such a direction that their paths cross. What's going to happen? They're going to bond. End of story. They're just going to bond. Because, well, that's the properties that they have. They have the charges that they have. They are what they are. They bond. They have their momentum made them cross paths. The oxygen molecule did not make a choice to bond. It didn't choose, oh, maybe I won't bond or maybe I will bond. It just bonded. If we want to change our definition of physical matter to the point that it does make choices, then we're changing our definition of the physical to the point where it's starting to become indistinguishable from the supernatural. Why even say supernatural or physical if you're going to change your definition of the physical so much that it's no different from the supernatural? Now, that means that all of our, if we're only allowed to explain everything with science, and if everything boils down to chemistry in our brains, just chemical reactions like this oxygen and hydrogen thing, that means that all of our idea that we make choices in life is all fake. There would be no point in having a legal system or courts. All of that would be nonsense. People would just need an injection to make the change what they do. There would, you wouldn't use your brain to process thought. You would be your brain. Okay? And so I ask you, do you make choices? If you do make choices, how could you not know that you are making them? How? Of course you know, because you're making them. If you are making them, then you know. So there's no evidence I need to give you. You know if you're making choices in your life or not. You need to figure that out on your own. Now, the next thing on the list is the better or worse dichotomy. So, let's imagine, okay, we'll use me as an example, okay? I have eyes, and they take in sensory inputs. They take light, right? And light tells me, it gives us information about what it bounced off of. So I can look at one thing and tell that, it's a Pop-Tart. And I can look at another thing and tell that it's a poopy. I can tell that by looking. I can tell the difference between food and waste. Something you should eat, something you should not eat. Okay? But I don't just look at it. My brain actually, processes the information. So let's pretend that science explains me. That means that I look at it, I see it, the light comes in, it causes a chemical reaction in here, and that chemical reaction causes me to eat or not eat. Again, there's no free will in that system. But also, there's no room for pleasure. I'm just doing or not doing things. And this is what the atheist philosopher David Hume calls the is-ought distinction. I know he's an atheist, but he has some things to say that made a lot of sense. And what he said was, there's two categories. There's a category of things that are, and that do and be, and they do or do not, they are what they are. And there's another category where we talk about what should be or what ought to be. And those are fundamentally different categories. Things that are, or the is category, and things that should be or should not be, or the ought, what ought to be category. And so, as soon as I go into an area where, eating the Pop-Tart causes pleasure and eating the poop causes displeasure, I'm moving into the what ought to be category. I've moved out of the what is category. And my point is that if science explains me, then I would have to remain in the is category. In fact, I would just do things. I would just, this is this, eat this. Now let's make it more complicated. Maybe, it's more complicated than that. Maybe there's two actions I could make. I won't say options or choices because there's no free will, right? It's just all chemistry. But there's two actions I could take. And so my brain is taking a variety of sensory inputs, maybe memory data, maybe smell, maybe, listening to other things people are saying. Lots of data's coming in. I've got two actions, a complicated set of sensory inputs for two possible actions I can make. What if my brain is trying to weigh which one of them to do? Well, am I not weighing which is better and which is worse? Even if it's just a chemical reaction? Well, not really. I'm not really weighing which one is better or if it's worse if it's only a chemical reaction, because, again, those sensory inputs would just be causing chemicals to just react. They don't make any choice to react or in any sense of way. And if I don't have enough sensory inputs to cause those chemical reactions in my brain to cause me to do one action or the other, if it remains a mystery, then you say, oh, well, I guess you'll just have to make a choice, Ben. No, I cannot make a choice. Who knows what? I guess I would be stuck in program malfunction, I couldn't just make a choice. It'd be more like an optical illusion. When you see an optical illusion, your brain is trying to process visual data and it just doesn't know what to shoot at you. And so sometimes, like, you see the box and it looks like it's this way or this way, there's a basic 3D illusion. Your brain's just flip-flopping because it's getting conflicting data. Just flip-flops. It doesn't make a choice of which one to show you. And so it should be obvious that any notions of what's better or what's worse really only apply to a being that makes choices of goodness and badness, of pleasure and displeasure, of joy and sorrow. They only apply when there's choices to be made. Because if it's just a chemical reaction, it's just going to react based on whatever inputs it gets, on whatever its properties are. It's just going to do what it does, and it's going to cause whatever action in the physical body that it causes. There would be no better or worse. And even if it weighed a bunch of different sensory inputs from a variety of possible actions, it's just going to weigh them all however it weighs them and just going to do whatever it's going to do based on the properties that it has. There will be no choice made. So there's no way for pleasure even to emerge in that system. It's just going to do things. And so I ask you, have you ever experienced any notion that anything is better or worse than anything else? I think you have. In epistemology, we call this a properly basic belief. It is the most certain type of knowledge that there is. It's more certain than science, because science can, you make a hypothesis, you try to prove it wrong. If you can't, well, then it's a good hypothesis. Okay? But maybe one day someone will observe something somewhere that proves it wrong. which happens all the time, and that's great because that's how science moves forward. In logic, you have a chain of reasoning, but you could make a mistake in your chain of reasoning somewhere. But in a properly basic belief, it means exactly what it sounds like. It's basic knowledge in the most proper way, the most properly basic form of knowing something. So, for example, a properly basic belief, if you hold your hand in front of your face, you see a hand, right? Well, technically, maybe the hand's an illusion. Maybe David Blaine's in the room, he's making you think you're seeing a hand. But the fact that you see a hand, if it's an illusion or not, is properly basic knowledge. Okay? The fact that you are experiencing pleasure, joy, sadness, sorrow, grief, all the above, properly basic. You just are experiencing them. I can't give you evidence for them. I can't give you a logical argument for them. It's properly basic knowledge. You just know if you feel awe, a sense of sadness, a sense of sorrow, a sense of grief, the ups and the downs, and the better and the worse, about the way things ought to be and the way they ought not to be, the way they should be and the way they shouldn't be. That's properly basic. Okay, so let's move on to the third thing on the list. Absolute standards of good and evil. So we talked about pleasure and our notions of good and bad, but the idea that there are absolute standards of good and bad beyond your brain, that some things are evil whether, no matter what your brain processes, that is still evil, that surely can't be based in the physical. Because again, that's in the realm of the ought. And the physical is in the realm of what is. The physical things are. They just simply exist. They cannot introduce notions of the way things ought to be. And they certainly cannot introduce absolute notions of the way things ought to be. In other words, all of us would probably agree that it's a terrible idea to kill a baby. That it is absolutely wrong no matter who you are. You better not do that. Okay? Absolute standard of goodness would at least include no baby murder. So, where does that come from? What is the basis of that? How do we explain that? Science can explain a lot of things. Science can explain why it's a good idea to take a bath. But not really. Like, why do you take a bath? Well, because I want to be healthy. Why do you want to be healthy? Because it's basically better to live than to die. Why is it better to live than to die? Science can't help you with that. Science can never help you with that. Science is descriptive. It is never prescriptive. It analyzes what is. It can never analyze what ought to be. So it can never become the basis for any sort of absolute standard of what is good and what is bad. So if we believe that there is an absolute standard, it has to flow from something supernatural. So the next one on the list is this question of something coming from nothing. And you hear this a lot. People want to say that scientists are investigating how something can come from nothing, and they found evidence that it can happen, and they've observed it in the lab, and blah 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 blah. Okay, let's slow down and think about this. Okay, if something happens, there's basically three explanations for why that something happened. One, it was caused by some physical cause. Two, it happened for no reason at all. Just completely without a cause. And three, it had a cause, but the cause was non-physical. So you got physical cause, nothing at all, or non-physical cause. In other words, the physical, the supernatural, or nothing at all. All science can do is say, we have failed to observe a physical cause. So boom, science can boom that one off the list and say that we clearly cannot observe any physical cause. We have observed something popping into being, And we cannot observe a physical reason why that happened. So it can remove the first one, but science can never observe nothing at all. So if something happened for nothing at all, science just would observe nothing at all. Science also cannot observe the supernatural, the non-physical. So this means science can't tell the difference between this and this. If it was coming from nothing, or if it was coming from a supernatural cause, they both would not show up to our observations of the physical world, because science just observes the physical. Time, space, matter, energy. So if you're not observing any time, space, matter, energy type cause, then that just leaves you with one of these two. How do you tell which of these two it was? You can't use science. Science can never answer that question. If it could, then the supernatural wouldn't really be the supernatural, and nothing at all wouldn't really be nothing at all. Okay? So we have to use other tools in our epistemological toolbox. In other words, epistemology is the study and philosophy of how we can come to know things. And yeah, we've talked about properly basic, we talked about logical reasoning, and I would argue that deductive logic tells us that things can't pop into existence for no reason at all, that they have a cause. And so if we rule that out, then we're left with supernatural. And in the case of the Big Bang, people say, well, the Kalam cosmological argument, and arguing that the Big Bang, is evidence for God, that's a God of the gaps thing. It's not. Science tells us that the best evidence leads to the conclusion that the universe had a beginning. That when we say the universe had a beginning, what we mean is all time, space, matter, and energy. That all of physical reality, even the space and time, began to exist. So what that means is science has ruled out a physical cause for the universe. The other question, whether the universe popped into existence for no reason at all, or because of a supernatural cause, science cannot answer that question at all. So, some scientists are out there looking for a possible physical cause that we have yet to observe. That's fine. They may find one. But it's important to understand, when it comes to the origin of the universe, if it does indeed have a beginning, then science can't tell you whether it was caused by God or by nothing at all. That's outside of the realm of scientific inquiry. And if you want to know the answer to those questions, if you think those questions matter in the least, and they do, then you're going to have to use other tools in your toolbox of knowledge to figure out which is correct. And they do matter. I mean, your idea, your belief about how everything began, whether from God or nothing at all, will determine what you think the purpose of existence is, of reality, the purpose of life. What God says it is, or no purpose at all. And then your idea about the overall purpose of life is going to determine what you think the correct choice is in life situations. Should I choose this? Should I do that or the other? And it's also going to determine where you think everything is ultimately going to wind up in the end. The ultimate destiny of all things. So these questions, the origin of everything, the meaning and the purpose of everything, the everyday morality, and good and bad choices, and the ultimate destiny of everything. These are the four most important questions everyone has to answer in his or her life. So that means that this question, these four questions really boil down to something outside of science. If science is telling us there's no physical cause for the universe, then was it God or was it nothing at all? Well, science can't answer that question, but how you answer that question determines what the answer is to the four most important questions everyone has to answer in your life. Where does everything come from? What is the purpose of everything? How to live life? Where will we all end up? origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. I hope this video makes sense. Thank you for hanging around to the end. Check out my invention if you haven't before. And we'll sign out with Jesus loves you and makes sense.